2.
Yes.
Or I'm reading chapter 2 because I think it makes for a better reading today. What's missed in the first chapter is essentially, find the page. Nope, backwards. There we go. What's missed in the first chapter essentially is that her grandfather has passed away and she's returned to her home city as a result of that. The blare of the train whistle jarred Kassie awake. Rubbing her fingers over her tired eyes, she surveyed the now busy train car. Garrick was gone, and the other passengers on the train were slowly collecting their belongings. She turned her attention outside the window just in time to see the towering city walls of Lockmount come into view. The megalithic stone construction had been built as a defensive structure 5 centuries earlier when wars were fought with neighboring kingdoms, but today there were no more than architectural features. Kassie stretched her arms up over her head, twisting back and forth in an attempt to alleviate the stiffness she felt throughout her body, but it was to little avail. I must have been asleep for hours, she whispered to herself, absent-mindedly kneading at a knot in her lower back. The past 24 hours had been a blur, and she wasn't sure how long it would be until everything in her world didn't feel upside down and overwhelming. The train sped along its track, heading down out of the mountains towards the city's northern gate. The stark white roof line of the royal palace, punctuated by the mossy green of the 3 bronze domes, was peeking up over the city walls. Kassie had lived most of her life in Lockmount, and as a child had spent her time exploring the old and narrow winding streets that made up her neighborhood, visiting her grandparents at the university and hearing stories of her family's past as the royal court historians. The position had been a hereditary one, and it would have likely passed to her when she was old enough. However, following her parents' deaths, King Cyrus had not wanted to continue the position. He had instead transferred the task of maintaining court history to the university. A chill ran through her body as a brief mental image of what her life would have been like working in the palace, apprenticing to parents she had never really known, flashed through her mind, her future decided for her. Stepping off the train onto the platform, Kassie scanned around her, taking in the hustle and bustle of the people hurrying to unknown destinations. She glanced up at the roof high above her head. It was made almost entirely of glass and supported by 16 towering columns, 8 on either side of the tracks. It allowed the station to be lit with the soft, natural light of the late evening sun, giving the scene in front of her a soft, ethereal glow. Her train had arrived at Platform 1, its passengers dispatching immediately onto the station's concourse, where small shops lined its far side. Some sold coffee and snacks for travelers, others sold books, newspapers, and anything else a person might need for a long journey across the kingdom. Their customers' chatter, creating a dull hum, filled the air around her until a familiar voice filtered through the din, shouted from the direction of a small shop to her left. Rising on her toes, Kassie strained her eyes over the crowd, but all she saw was a blur coming towards her. Seconds later, the owner of the voice collided with her, lifting her up and enveloping her in a tight hug. "Danon, it's great to see you too," she said, returning her best friend's hug. A smile spreading across her face. They had been friends since childhood, and the familiarity of his presence filled a void she hadn't realized was there. "I assumed you'd be coming home when you heard the news, and I've been sitting over there all day waiting to catch you when you got off the train," Danon said, gesturing to the cafe behind him. Peering past his broad shoulders, she spotted a table littered with paper cups and napkins and assumed that it must be his. "How long have you been here?" "The first train from the east came in at 9:08 this morning, so since before then," he replied, taking her bag and slinging it over his shoulder, his blue eyes gleaming at her. "Let me carry this. Do you want a coffee?" "Have I ever not wanted coffee?" "One coffee coming up." He grabbed her hand and led her through the crowd back to his debris-strewn table. Gathering up some of the used cups, he deposited them in the bin on his way back into the cafe. Kassie sat content to relax while she waited, and scanned the crowd around her. As a child, she had insisted that all of Lockmount could fit inside the train station, and this evening it seemed as if that might have been achieved. The people racing around paid little attention to each other, in too much of a hurry to get wherever they were going. However, as she had feared, a few people appeared to recognize her, glancing her way more than she felt was necessary. Most were brief glances. Still, one tall man, dressed entirely in black, whose features were obscured by a wide-brimmed hat slung low on his head, seemed to be staring at her intently. Before she could determine if he was familiar or not, an older lady, her white hair pulled up into a tight bun on top of her head, stopped to give her condolences for her grandfather, distracting her from the man. When she looked again, he had disappeared. Danon returned seconds later, balancing coffee and honey pastries for two. "It is great to see you. I've missed you," Danon said, handing her one each of the coffee and pastries. Kassie took a moment to observe him as he settled his tall frame into the chair across from her. His hair was shorter than she remembered, cropped tightly to his head, but otherwise Danon looked exactly as she remembered him. Same, well-put-together look in his ironed button-down shirt, casual but deliberate. "I've missed you too," Kassie replied, reaching across the table and squeezing his hand. "Granddad told me in his letters that you were working with him." "Yes, for the past 6 months, to help him with his research. I even have my own office at the university," Danon said, a beaming grin on his face. "Congratulations," she replied, holding up her coffee to toast her friend. "Thanks, Kassie, and I'm sorry about your grandfather. He was a great man, and I wouldn't be where I am now without his support and guidance," he said in an unusually serious tone. "Will you be staying at your family's house?" "Yeah, I guess I will. It'll be strange being there without my grandparents. It's such a big place for one," Kassie replied, wrapping her hands around the familiar warmth of her coffee. "Although I suppose Granddad has been living there all by himself for the past 2 years," she added, her voice trailing off as she spoke. Danon nodded knowingly and gave her a soft smile. "We can't tell the future, Kassie, and we can't change the past. I know your grandfather knew you loved him." She nodded, unable to say anything, without allowing her unshed tears to fall. Instead, she sipped at her coffee, hiding her eyes. "Would you like me to come with you to the house, to keep you company?" "I'd like that." "Cedric, have you located the girl?" Prince Diomedes asked with a biting tone that left Cedric with very little doubt. There was only one acceptable answer. "Yes, Your Highness. Kassie Kendrick arrived in Lockmount on the evening train." "And?" "Our operative has made contact with her, and she will be returning to the Kendrick house, as we assumed she would," Cedric replied. His knees were bent, and his head was slightly bowed to keep his overtly tall frame lower than that of the prince, who stood before him, picking his way through a pile of metal-tipped arrows. Cedric wasn't sure why the prince was so picky. He had no real skill with the weapon. Instead of responding to his court advisor, Prince Diomedes grasped an arrow and set it into his bow, making an exaggerated show of aiming at the target set up at the far end of the royal shooting range. Cedric maintained his crouch, waiting as the prince lined up his shot for what seemed an hour. At least it felt that long to his aching knees and back. Finally, the prince let the arrow fly towards its target. "Bravo, Your Highness," the steward at the end of the range yelled, clapping his hands as he hurried to retrieve the arrow. Cedric barely managed to withhold a chuckle as he watched the steward hop past the target and stop 2 feet beyond it, rising up on his toes to pull the arrow from its final resting place in the wall above his head. "Cedric, I wish to speak with the girl. Bring her to me tonight," the prince said, his attention focused on choosing another arrow. "You may go." "We will fetch her immediately, Your Highness," Cedric said as he backed up. He did not want to linger. Should the prince change his mind, his legs wouldn't hold out much longer. Leaving the station on foot, no motorized vehicles were allowed in this portion of the city. Kassie and Danon turned south towards the harbor of the Kendrick home. Their route took them through the city gates and then along the main street leading to the royal palace on the opposite side of the old city. Kassie felt the rise and fall of the uneven pavement beneath her feet. No other city in the empire had cobblestones. They were unique to the capital, and Kassie had always enjoyed the way they massaged her feet as she walked. The shop-lined street was similar to many in the city's old section. Uneven rows of yellowed stone buildings, arched doorways, lining their facades. The road itself was wide enough for the restaurants along it to set up outdoor dining patios, and local farmers from the countryside to set up produce stands along its center. At this time of day, the farmers had long since packed up and returned to the rolling hills of farmland to the north of the city. The shops had begun turning on lights, their patios filling with couples and families whose chatter filled the air with the pleasant hum of life. It was just as she remembered it. As a young girl, she used to walk this avenue with her grandparents. They would take her shopping along this street on bright weekend afternoons, and her grandfather would always treat her to an ice cream whenever her grandmother wasn't looking. "What are you thinking about?" Danon asked, as he playfully bumped her shoulder with his own. "Oh, how much I've missed Lockmount." "You sound surprised. I didn't realize I did until now." "Was it just Lockmount you missed?" Danon asked. The lightness Kassie could hear in his tone defied the hurt he was trying not to portray in his expression. but his pouting lip gave him away. A bird will land on your bottom lip if you aren't careful, Kassie said, poking him gently in the arm. Of course I missed you too. Good, I'm quite incredible, so it would be odd if you hadn't, he said with a wink. By the time they arrived at the Kendrick house, only the last few rays of sunlight could be seen on the horizon, and the automatic lights along the narrowing streets were popping on one by one. The old gas-powered lights were replaced by electricity coil a century earlier. The coils were able to draw power directly from the air, and most energy in Asho was acquired on this same model. This electricity now powered most of the kingdom, but the Kendrick house had been among the first private homes after the palace to be converted. Her great-great-grandfather had been keen to have all of the new inventions of his day, and many unique and strange objects and additions could be found throughout the house. Kassie had grown up exploring it all. She unlocked the door, and Danon followed her up the spiral sets of stairs from the main door landing and through to the living room at the top. She was heading for the kitchen. It was her favorite room in the house. In the mornings, it was bathed in light from the sun rising over the palace on the opposite side of the harbor, but it hadn't always been that way. Her grandparents had completed extensive renovations when she was a little girl. Before then, she was told, the thick stone walls and narrow arrow-loop windows had kept the house dark at all times of day. Kassie sat down at the kitchen table, while Danon rummaged through the cupboards looking for something to eat. You must be starving after the train. I'll fix us up a snack. Thanks, Danon, Kassie said, picking up a roughly folded newspaper. Granddad had finished his crossword puzzle, she noted, holding up the newspaper. He always finished it. She unfolded it to see the headline. King Bucyrus is dead. Prince Diomedes' royal coronation set for 4 weeks from today. It was the same edition she had found on the train. She was setting the newspaper back down when something about the crossword puzzle caught her eye. Danon, my name is an answer in this puzzle, she said, frowning, as she looked at the clue. A tool used to clean teeth. What? Kassie exclaimed. That can't be right. What was Granddad doing? Danon walked around the table to look over her shoulder. Has he written in any other wrong answers? He asked, curiously. I'm not sure. Kassie looked at the puzzle again. Oh, wait, here's one. The sun each evening, Granddad wrote. Look. Kassie, look. Danon put the two incorrect answers together. Maybe he was leaving you a message. It looks like he may have written over older correct answers. Maybe, but why? Kassie said, picking up her grandfather's pen and ripping a corner off the back page of the newspaper. She began to write. Kassie, and look, she spoke as she wrote down the words in the blank margin of the paper. Here's another, Danon exclaimed, pointing at 8 down. Hiding isn't the answer to a chanteuse, it would be singer. You're right, she added the word hiding to her list. The pair quickly went through the rest of the crossword puzzle, picking out all the words her grandfather had answered incorrectly. Okay, so we have Kassie, look, hiding, you, place, love, and secret. Kassie read out. Kassie, look, secret, hiding place, love you, Danon said, rearranging the words to make more sense. Kassie blinked back tears. Those were her grandfather's last words to her. Any idea where this secret hiding place might be? Danon asked, jumping up from the table. There is at least a dozen on this floor alone, Kassie said, looking at the room around her. There's a compartment in the brick behind the stove, and another in the cold room under the floor, she continued. Did you have a favorite one? We could start there. There was one we used a lot when I was a child. Granddad used to hide little notes and treats for me there, so Gran wouldn't know he was spoiling me. Kassie headed towards the fireplace. Danon followed her across the room. All thoughts of snacks were forgotten. The trick is you need to push the keystone from both sides at the same time, she said, demonstrating the move when he joined her. As a child, she had required a small stool her granddad had kept tucked away at the back of the hearth. Now she was able to easily reach the center of the arch by rising up on her toes. At her touch, a tile on the far right of the mantel slid out of place to reveal a 4-inch square hollow in the stone behind it. Good call, Kassie. There's something in here. Reaching into the space, Kassie removed a small wooden box. What is it? I think it might be a Comedian puzzle box. She turned the box over and over in her hands. It was only 3 inches long and 2 inches deep, with a large chevron pattern made of dark inlaid wood adorning the top and bottom. Kassie had seen many of these boxes while playing her granddad's treasure hunt games. This one appeared more straightforward than others he had subjected her to. Do you recognize it? No, not really, but I've seen examples like it before. Granddad once used a box that took me 3 days to open. This one looks easier though. As she talked, her fingers were pressing gently on the edges of each chevron until she felt one give, depressing slightly into the box. See, I think I have it, she grinned as the side of the box slid off easily. Is there anything inside? Danon inquired eagerly. Yes, Kassie grinned, holding up a tiny square of paper. What does it say? Dana stepped closer to read over her shoulder. The paper had been folded many times to fit inside the box. A knot was forming in her throat as she flattened it out once again. My dear Kassie, congratulations on finding the first clue of your journey. It has been many years since I have set up a treasure hunt for you, but in putting the final touches on this one, I delighted in the memories of all the happy times we spent exploring. First, this crazy old house of ours, and then later the city around us. This treasure hunt will take you much further than any of those you have solved as a child. I thought that was only fitting, as what you will discover at the end is far greater than you could have ever imagined. Love always, Granddad Eamon. P.S. Part 1 of 2. It's the treasure hunt he set up for me, Kassie said, taking the letter from Dana. What treasure hunt? Granddad sent me a letter a month ago that he was setting up a treasure hunt, like the ones he used to when I was little. It was the original reason I was coming home. This must be the start of it, Kassie said, looking down thoughtfully. You should follow it. One last adventure with your grandfather. Damon said, I'll help you. I don't know if this is the right time, Kassie replied. There will be so much to do here, I'm sure it can wait. I arranged everything for you yesterday, he said, a shy smile gracing his features, which Kassie wasn't sure she had ever seen on him before. I knew you wouldn't want to have to deal with the arrangements yourself. Oh, Dana, thank you. She hugged him tightly. How could she have run away from someone who knew her so well? When is the funeral? I arranged it for a month from now. I hoped for then the hype around the coronation and everything might have calmed down. I knew you would want to keep it quiet, a quiet ceremony. Still, do you think it would be appropriate to follow this treasure hunt without him? I doubt your grandfather would have used his dying breath, to leave you a note directing you to this clue if he didn't want you to follow it. Maybe it's more important than you think. Dana inspected the note as he spoke. See, what you will discover at the end is far greater than you could ever imagine. What if this discovery he is referring to is time sensitive? You might be right. I suppose it can't hurt to take a closer look. Is there anything else in the box? He says part 1 of 2. Dana, who had taken the box and was examining it closely as they talked, looked inside. It looks empty, but the inside seems a bit smaller than the outside. Maybe there is another opening, Kassie said, taking the box back. She turned it over in her hands, examining the sides and the base. I think if I push here, it might work. As she spoke, she pushed gently on the chevrons at the base of the box. As before, one of the inlaid wooden segments depressed, and she was able to slide out the other side of the box, revealing a second hidden compartment. Aha, Dana exclaimed. Is there anything inside? Her brow furrowing, she held up a small egg-shaped object, so Dana could see it. It was the size of a quail's egg and made of tarnished, etched silver with a loop affixed to the one end. Do you recognize it? Yes, Dana said, taking the pendant and examining it for himself. It's a locket. A locket? It just looks like a pendant to me. Well, my grandmother had something very similar, and it was a locket, but maybe this one isn't, Dana replied, handing back to her. How did hers open? Kassie asked. She couldn't see any seams where the egg could open. It looked solid. Dana shrugged. I don't know how to open it, sorry. Oh. But my brother Thaddeus has studied these lockets. Maybe we should go and ask him about them. Dana took the locket back from Kassie and examined it himself. I thought your brother was working abroad. He was, but he took an archiving position at the university. He is in charge of all the royal documents. He returned the locket to the box. That was my parents' position when the collection was still kept at the palace, Kassie noted. Is he still as quiet as he was when we were kids? He's changed a bit, but still as quiet as ever. And you think he'll be able to open the locket? I expect so. He used to play with our grandmothers all the time. We can go visit him tonight if you like.